Night school.
Night school.
I have something exciting to tell you. I waited to tell you on air because it's sick.
Okay.
So this week I was studying different Christian meditation practices. Well, Googling, not studying.
Sure.
And there's a organization, WCCM, World Center for Christian Meditation.
Okay.
They teach a technique that is identical to transcendental meditation from the yoga, from the modern yoga tradition, and japa japa from ancient yoga. That's like the original name. And Dhikr from Sufism. And all of those meditations are you internally chant a 1 or 2 word mantra in an ancient language for like 20 minutes. And at some point, something spiritual happens throughout that process for a variety of reasons explained by those different traditions. So WCCM, the mantra that they advocate is Maranatha. And I looked it up in the Bible. It's an Aramaic word. And looked it up. It's used in something, Colossians, and it's a weird verse because Paul is saying, basically, everybody who doesn't follow Jesus, fuck them. Maranatha. It's a really weird verse. Like every single translation says, everybody who doesn't follow the Lord or obey the Lord, let him be accursed or put a curse on him. That's pretty much what every single translation says. And then he just exclaims, Maranatha. So,
and but that's not translated. That's just.
They just keep the Aramaic word, Maranatha, in modern translations. The ones that do translate it, though, translate it, come Jesus or come Lord. So I assume that the WCCM is using that as a way to invite Jesus. They're just using it as an invitation to Jesus. That's why they're using it as a mantra.
Sure.
But the context is super funny, right? So I was like, man, what does this word mean? I couldn't find anything on it besides just those, like, modern translations that I assume to be surface level, because I agree with Neil Douglas Klotz's idea. I don't know where he got it. He got it from some ancient source, this idea. It might have been Kabbalah, like ancient mystical Judaism, that says the words of Jesus have 3 layers of meaning. There's the literal, and then there's the metaphorical, and then there's the universal or mystical.
Okay.
And these modern translations deal in the literal or the metaphorical, maybe even interchangeably and arbitrarily and randomly which one, but rarely touch the universal or mystical. And I'm like, man, there's something deeper to this word Maranatha. What is this?
Sure.
I couldn't find anything on it. So I emailed Neil Douglas Klotz, and he responded.
Really?
Yeah. And this is my favorite theologian, my favorite author.
Yeah, what did he write? I know we've covered something of his.
Last episode, Prayers of the Cosmos. So he wrote, well, he didn't write the translation, but it is from his writings that I got the Aramaic Lord's Prayer and memorized.
Okay.
And then the whole last episode was based on his book, Prayer of the Cosmos, and his like layered translation of the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
And then he also wrote Genesis Meditations, and that book was the kind of...
Catalyst?
Yeah, thank you. Perfect. Yeah. The catalyst for us inheriting all these books that are behind us that will soon be in the background as we record. Basically, a family has all these books left over from someone who passed away, and they decided to store them in the studio so we could have access to them, all these dope mystical books. And there was a coworker of mine who was like, you ever heard of this book, Genesis Meditations? And I'm like, no, that sounds really interesting. He's like, it's by Neil Douglas Klotz. I'm like, oh, I love that guy. No way. How the hell do you have that book? And then one thing led to another, and they're like, yeah, we have 1,000 books in our basement, and we never read them. And then we all got the idea, let's just store them in the podcast studio. So that's coming soon. So he wrote 2 books that have been really significant to my life, and he responded to my email in like 2 days.
Awesome.
And he said that Mar means something like... I don't feel like pulling up the email. I'll actually cover it in the next episode, because next episode I'm going back to talking about Prayers of the Cosmos by him. He said that Mar means something like omnipresent light. And he referenced this phrase that an angel said to Mary that is generally translated as the Lord is always with you. And he said it means something more like the light that guides you is also all around you. That's closer to what the angel communicated to Mary. Mary as in Jesus' mother before Jesus existed, before Jesus was born, or he existed from the beginning of time, but before the historical figure was born. And so that was really cool. And that idea that the light that guides you is all around you is relevant to what I'm talking about today, which is how the teachings of Jesus cultivate non-duality. And non-duality is a state of being or way of perceiving that views everything as fundamentally unified and only secondarily separate. It's central. That idea is central to modern physics and the whole biblical tradition, the Judeo-Christian tradition, and the whole Vedic tradition, all of Hinduism and Buddhism. Mm-hmm. That idea that there is a layer of reality that is unified and that holds everything together and that everything comes from is very important. And I haven't heard it articulated directly that the teachings of Jesus are a method of coming into that state where everything is viewed as one, mm-hmm. fundamentally. Even though it's still real that you're separate and I'm separate, that's secondary. That's relative. The mm-hmm. absolute level is that we all share this common light, this common source. Mm-hmm. The unified field, so I'm referring now to the physics term, is the single quantum substrate that manifests as different kinds of quantum fields. And then those different kinds of quantum fields manifest as different forces and different particles. Mm-hmm. And those multiply into or manifest as all of the various elements and forces that make up everything that we know and see and love and understand. It all springs from this unified field. Mm-hmm. And that means not just that everything came from one source, but that the one source that everything came from, speaking in physical terms, is currently what everything is made out of. That you are the unified field playing a certain game, and I am mm-hmm. the unified field playing a certain game, most fundamentally. And so in the yoga tradition, they have a phrase, a unity consciousness, which is to be aware in the way that the unified field is aware, even as you're interacting in your daily life. So there's samadhi or transcendental consciousness, which means that you close your eyes, you chant one mantra for 20 minutes, and eventually you kind of leave behind that mantra or zoom all the way through that mantra and experience total silence and a feeling of total absence of time, absence of space, absence of form, absence of self-identity, just kind of a nothingness / allness at the mm-hmm. same time. And in the yoga tradition, they believe that if you do a lot of good works or practice very, very strict devotion to something or just repeatedly return to that transcendental state and go between that transcendental kind of samadhi, deep meditation state and your normal life, eventually you will attain unity consciousness. That's the ultimate goal of the yoga system. And so a yoga is to attain yoga. So yoga means a way of attaining unity, and mm-hmm. it means unity. So you attain yoga through a yoga. So you could pick You could pick meditation as your yoga. You could pick good works as your yoga. You could pick devotion to something as your yoga. You could pick the pursuit of knowledge as your yoga. And those are called bhakti yoga. The knowledge is jnana yoga. So they have all of these different paths that they identify for coming mm-hmm. into unity consciousness. So if you get all the way down to the bottom of physics, through the pursuit of knowledge, you get to a place where you are fully convinced that everything is fundamentally one. And so the yogis would say even physics is a yoga. But yoga also means unity. So what I want to argue in this episode is that the unified field is God. And I also want to argue that the teachings of Jesus are a yoga. The teachings of Jesus are a way, if you listen to them and you take them seriously and you embody them and you strive every day to live them out with greater and greater integrity and what's the word for true to its original purpose? Like if you made a model and it was exactly like the original, I might get it in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I'm referring to.
I think so.
So just imagine that word in your head with that. You live out the teachings of Jesus more and more with that. And then, and I believe that leads to unity consciousness. So I first want to, and also I'm wrapping up my bachelor's in 4 months from MIU, mm-hmm. Maharishi International University, degrees in consciousness and human potential. This is my undergrad degree before I go to seminary, and so I want to use my senior project to make this argument, and this episode is kind of a rough draft of that senior project. And so knowing what unity consciousness is, I want you to unpack the core teachings of Jesus with me and kind of help me make these connections.
Sure.
How can we make connections between the teachings of Jesus and what it means to attain unity consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
Where I want to start first, just to make sure our terms are defined very clearly, is I want to start by listing 5 of the names of God, or 5 of the identities of God in the Christian tradition, and making the connection that the unified field and God are synonymous. So love is one of the identities of God in the Bible. God is love, and love is God. If you know love, you know God. If you know God, you know love. Love, in its most fundamental form, its most universal form, is the mysterious and invisible force that holds living things together. The mysterious and invisible force that draws living things together. When, that herds stay together, that people stay together, that people's favorite thing is people. People move where people are. And even if somebody was fully capable of surviving on their own, there would still be something that drew them to be around people. And so I think the idea that the unified field is capital L love is actually, let's look up the definition of agape love, because agape is the godly love identified in the Bible, and there's a few different Greek words. So in Christianity, agape, a few different Greek words for love. You know where I was going with that.
Yeah.
In Christianity, agape is the highest form of love, charity, the love of God for man and of man for God. So it's different than brotherly love, self-love, different than romantic love.
Godly love.
Godly love. Yeah. So the only way to have godly love would be to love from the perspective of God. And the perspective of God is that transcendent perspective, the perspective that sees everything from the outside. In the Christian tradition, we really ask like the typical Christian to define God. I'm sure the typical Christian wouldn't prefer hearing me say that the unified field is God. But you ask the typical Christian to define God, and they just start tripping over themselves, because it's like God is outside of the universe, right? Okay, God is omnipresent. So God is everywhere, but God is outside of the universe. So which fucking one is it? And they'll say, hell is distant from God. Hell is the place where God is absent. Oh, okay. Well, so he's not omnipresent then.
True.
So omnipresent except when he's not.
Right.
Outside, okay, so you're kind of deist. You're kind of like God existed at the beginning of time and then let everything just run its course. But you're monotheist, so you think that God interacts with the thing. So he only interacts with life sometimes, but sometimes he doesn't.
Right.
So then God isn't omnipresent, right? Or like the Bible is written by God. Oh, so isn't every book written by God, though, if God is omnipresent? Like if God created everything, that didn't God create every single book in existence? So what exactly are we saying when we say God wrote the Bible, but he didn't write every other book? All of this shit gets really tangled up. These concepts, but if the unified field is God, it does make sense that God is omnipresent and outside of time and space, because God is before there was even time or space discriminated, delineated, separated, defined, categorized. There has to be a separation for there to be any concept. So if there's oneness at the beginning and end of time, then that transcendental force, that transcendent force is outside of being, outside of time, space, yet everything within it. And, well, let me ask you, what do you think about the idea that the unified field / God is the highest form of love because it's the invisible force that holds everything together? Does that jive with you or feel like a reach?
I think that, it could be. That feels like, if I had to guess, like which one of these loves is the most important or powerful or significant, I would think it would be that one. That's what I would bet on. I don't feel confident in it. That's what you're saying, right? Like, is it the most significant, the one that's the most powerful?
Are you asking whether I'm comparing agape love to the other 3 loves?
Yes, that's what I feel like you're saying.
No, I'm not comparing those. But I am asking if you think it makes sense that agape love is the unified field. That agape love and the unified field are synonymous.
Yeah, those fit for me. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's totally possible. I think that it doesn't... make the weirdness of that idea of being outside of something yet everywhere. I think it doesn't make it any less weird for me. Like that science-y version of that same thing is just as confusing but acceptable to me. Although I think it could be a better argument for a lot of people, like coming at it from that sort of scientific angle and like explaining it in that way, I think is a path for many people that would make that sort of idea more acceptable, looking at it through a quantum physics side instead of like a theological way. I think that is like more sensible for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Although it doesn't do anything for me, because I am okay with the idea that God could be like outside watching, but also be underlying all of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So God is underlying all of it, outside watching it. In your mind, is God also everything in the whole theater that's going on in the universe, or some of it? Some of it's God and some of it has broken from God and is separate from God.
I suspect that ultimately it's all God, and that if you pull off enough masks, but some are wearing deeper, like more layers of masks than others. But if you go back far enough, if you keep peeling, eventually it's probably all the same thing playing a game, where it's most fun if you forget that you're playing a game in some parts of the game.
Right.
Like that.
Right. The fact that I want to talk about the concept of the God just means that I'm ready for the part of the game where it's fun to remember. It's like, oh, it's so fun to forget. And then it's fun to remember. And it's fun to forget again. And it's fun to remember. And it's fun to forget.
It's either way's fun.
Yeah,
totally.
They're both fun.
You would want to play both. So you would make both games available if you could.
Right.
Yeah.
And in that idea that the universe is a theater and God is deep down acting as every role in the theater.
And as the stage.
And the stage and the director and the audience.
Yeah.
And the air that the actors are breathing as they play.
Right.
That idea is explained explicitly, directly in Hinduism. And in the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's usually not articulated that way. But most Christians, they just start tripping over these concepts when you ask them. Like, what are you made of? Like, are you made of God? It's like, I'm made by God, but I'm not made of God. It's like, well, if God is omnipresent, then so everything in the universe is God's imagination. So isn't God's imagination part of God? So aren't you God? Aren't you made of God? Mm-hmm. And then they just go, no. Well, but it's not like for a reason or anything. They just go, no. But there's that quote, you can't wake somebody up who's pretending to be asleep.
That's a good one. I don't know if I've heard that. That's good.
It's on the wall of the Richland Library going up the stairs on the left. That's printed on the wall. And I think that's why sometimes you run into that, where you talk to somebody about a spiritual concept and there's a point where they just go, I just don't see it that way. Well, it's like, well, explain. It's just like, I just don't agree. Like,
right.
All right.
And they're not interested in trying to unpack that or trying to like resolve those sort of conflicts. And it is like, who are you to say that they can't keep them for now if they want to play that way?
Dude, do it.
Thinking that that's what it is. Like,
right.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So, truth. God is identified as the spirit of truth in Christian scripture. So if truth as such, not truth as in like a true idea, but truth itself, it seems to me that it would be the standard of objective reality or objective reality itself. Because a lie is something that takes you out of alignment with what's objectively real. And a truth is, or a true thing that you say is something that brings you more into alignment with what's objectively real. And so I would think that truth as such would have to be the unified field, because the fact that there is a such thing as an objective reality that we're aligning ourselves with means that there's an aspect of life that we all share. Because if there isn't an aspect of life that we all share, then there's no such thing as objective or fundamental truth. And that's like, if you watch like the new documentary, What is a Woman? By Matt Walsh on Daily Wire. Not that I recommend buying Daily Wire, because that's the only thing I watched on there and I'll probably delete it. But they are interviewing people like everyday people on the streets. It's easy to find stupid people on the streets. That's something wrong with Daily Wire too.
Sure.
Anybody can find someone idiotic on the street
Right.
that disagrees with their political opinions.
Of course.
But the documentary, one of the things it's pointing out is that there is like a total deconstruction of objective reality or truth, or at least people's attachment to that. That people will say like if I say I'm something, does that mean that I just am that? And people will unironically say, you are whatever you say. Whatever you say you are that. It's not that you think you are that. You literally are, because you have the authority to determine what truth is for you. So that's a denial of there being any objective fundamental reality. They're just saying what's true for you is true for you. What's true for me is true for me.
Mm-hmm.
They're not saying whether you're wrong or not, you have a right to be wrong. They're saying it is true if you say it is.
Yeah.
So, and I think that there would be a correlation between people who say there is no God and people who say there's no objective truth. Like that's, those concepts are kind of inseparable. You ask somebody, is there a God? They say yes. And you go, is there such thing as objective reality? They're gonna be more likely to say yeah.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's almost always going to be a case. I think there'll be really high correlation there.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fact that there is a fundamental truth means there is something in reality that we all share, that nature is intrinsically and inextricably connected to, and humans are intrinsically and inextricably connected to that same thing. And so that is that source, common thread, and fundamental level of being that is in all things, in my opinion. So the unified field is truth, is God. Those all three are synonyms too. Mm-hmm. Do you follow that argument?
Yeah, the truth one is like a little bit stretchier for me, but I can see it, like, because that unified field is always there. It's always like connecting everything, and we can't like mess it up. Like it's going to return, because if you tell a lie, you are distorting what's true. Like you're making the world less like it is. Like you're pulling it in a direction away from itself. Like the whole, the truth away from itself. But you can't actually completely undo it. Like your lie will...
You tangle yourself up in it.
Yeah, and your lie will be untangled eventually.
Right.
Like every secret is going to get known eventually, and it's going to return back to truth.
Right.
Like truth is what we're going to return back to, because that's going to be there. If we all died, like everybody on the planet died, and then a new species moved in, like there are still certain truths that are going to remain the same, regardless of the fact that the perspective has absolutely changed.
Right.
There's a whole new group of people. So yeah, I don't think it's... I think you have to explain it more than the other... the love.
Love one. Because there's a more direct link between the unified field that everything shares and the invisible, mysterious force that connects and draws all things together. Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I didn't say about love is that the fact that love is a force that is trying to move everything together implies that the universe is seeking an equilibrium that requires more harmony than is currently present.
Yeah.
And that is the force by which, and in the yoga tradition, that's dharma. People say dharma is like their individual calling, right? Mm-hmm. But dharma is the force that is drawing the universe in the direction of harmony. And then your individual dharma is the way that universal force is creating change in you to align you with that universal goal.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's that which you can do in your life that will cause most harmony on a universal scale.
Okay.
So, but yeah, love is that force. That's another word for that force, I think. Another example for the truth one is when two people are wrong, or not when two people are wrong, when two people tell different stories, the fact that the unified field is truth and that the unified field is the equilibrium that brings everything into harmony is why we say the truth might be somewhere in the middle. There's something that is truth. Mm-hmm. And if you've departed from it and you've departed from it, it must be somewhere in the middle. We assume that it's between the people. Yeah. We don't assume that they both went in the left direction from the truth, right? Well, one of them must have gone left to the truth and the other one got some further left, or they must have gone further behind the truth and then other person's even more behind the truth. We assume it's somewhere between them. So we assume that there is something about the process of seeking equilibrium between two divided things that brings them both in the direction of that which is objectively and actually true.
Yeah. Yeah. Also with the idea of like them pulling in different directions and that the truth must be somewhere in the middle, as long as they were not going literally along the same vector, along the same line away from the truth. Like unless they were along the same line of thinking, in the middle is always going to be closer to the center.
That's right.
Like just geometrically, it's always going to be closer to the center, which if you go to the middle between the two of them.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God is also compared to the Logos. Beginning of John, God is the Logos. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and God was the Logos. So it's saying the Logos existed from the beginning, and it was with God, and it was God. And Logos translates to a few things. It's a real abstract word. It's a Greek word, but it's such a unique word that it still is used in English because it translates to universal intelligence. It translates to the ability to generate a concept. So and that's actually my translation of the definition word of God, because it doesn't mean word as in a piece of language necessarily, unless you view language as broadly as like quantum fields communicate with a kind of language. DNA has a kind of language. Computers have a kind of language. Humans have a kind of language. Dolphins have a kind of language. Language, not the human construct, but language, the universal principle that there's a such thing as a chunk of information or a chunk of data. The ability to generate and package and name and produce a chunk of information or data is the Logos. It's also translated as divine reason or reason itself. Not reasoning about something that already exists, but reason in its pure form before it has even been used or applied to anything. Translated to creative order. So intentionally established order and structure. That's all Logos.
Yeah. Logic is a derivation of it too, right?
I would assume so.
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, if it means reason as such, it's got to be. Yeah. So the unified field could be that, because the unified field is the unified field has to be creative in the sense that it can make things. That's the definition of creative. You can make things. The unified field made everything. So it's not just creative, it's creativity. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's not intelligent. Like you're intelligent because you can logic, because you can process data, because you can choose between different concepts and discern what's meaningful or discern what's relevant to a specific purpose, which is in a sense what discerning meaning is. You can do intelligence. You are intelligent, but the unified field is not intelligent. It is intelligence. It's the source of anything being intelligible, of anything having any kind of definition or structure of reality. It all comes from the unified field. So, right when I first started doing TM, I had a message kind of pop up into my head randomly one day, like a divine insight. And it said, what does creativity look like? What does intelligence look like? And I pondered that for a couple months and started going to MIU. And I found that one of the popular phrases at MIU, one of the ways that they categorize the way that they do education is they call their approach to yoga, approach to education, the science of creative intelligence. And I'm like, oh, how interesting. Like after I had been contemplating that.
Yeah.
They, when MIU says the science of creative intelligence, they are talking about developing an understanding of and then practically using the concept of the unified field to establish harmony in yourself and help establish harmony for the world. So I do think that it makes sense that the unified field and God and creative intelligence are all synonymous. Does that all jive with you?
Creative intelligence. So that is basically what we're translating Logos to in the best way.
Best way to me, because I've been studying yoga philosophy, so those words resonate with me. But for someone else, divine order or intelligence itself, or creative order or divine reason, those are two translations or two definitions provided by Google. Those might resonate more with you or someone listening.
Mm-hmm. The universal field as creative intelligence. It's a lot of what you were saying felt pretty closely connected, like with truth, like with just ideas being like a part of the unified field, like just sort of all information kind of being a part of it. Anything that you could come up with would be contained within the set of rules that is made, that like the universe, or that the unified field is. It's all kind of contained within that. I guess it's not quite there for me. Creative intelligence as the unified field. Can I accept that that is the same thing? I think that, like, I think that, like, God is ultimately like the source of all knowledge, like of the source of all ideas at some level. But I'm having a hard time making that make as much sense as the other two.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So knowledge is knowledge refers to information and data, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So knowledge exists, and we choose certain data and knowledge for a reason. Knowledge and data serve some purpose. They're used for something. There's a such thing as knowledge and data that are incorrect. There are false pieces of knowledge, of information and data, false knowledge. There's true knowledge. There's information and data that's true. So the difference between the logos and truth is that the logos is knowledge itself, but truth is that compass that defines which of your fragments of knowledge are true and which ones aren't.
Okay.
You see what I mean?
Like, you lost me in the last sentence. So truth is...
Yeah, so you have, like, let's say you have 100 pieces of knowledge right there.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all knowledge, but only some of them are true. So God or the unified field is, in one sense, knowledge itself. Those are all little pieces of God, right? But some of those fragments of knowledge are not aligned with what? I would say with truth.
Yeah.
With that aspect of the unified field. So not all knowledge is truthful, and not all truth is knowledge, because knowledge is like a little shrapnel of truth. There's a such thing as truth as such, truth that has no separations from itself, that there's a kind of field of truth where no lies can exist. And our human project of discerning what's true and what isn't is an attempt to build that puzzle that is truth itself, where nothing untrue can exist. So truth is the standard of what is objective reality. Knowledge is a little fragment of truth. So what I'm trying to do right now is clarify the difference between truth and the logos, since it sounded like you felt what I was saying about the logos was too close to what I was saying about truth.
Right. Yeah, I did feel that. Like, I was thinking this mostly just sounds like what is there to know? Like, is what a lot of it sounded like.
But don't think of truth as information that is true. Truth isn't necessarily just information. A whale swimming in the right direction is truth. There's not necessarily any information visible on that. You think of truth as like a book that's fucking spot on, or a speech that's fucking spot on.
I think of it like rules, like the rules of like how things should go, like the way. That's what I think of.
Well, the rules and the way are two different things. Like the rules are knowledge. The way is truth.
Okay. So when I say the rules, I guess I mean like the way it works, like the way the world works, the way, that's what I'm saying.
Right. So the way that the way that the world works, in an abstract sense, that is truth. Truth isn't necessarily articulated in any certain way. It's just an omnipresent force that sets the standard of what's objective and is what is in alignment with God. once you articulate something that is true, that's knowledge, and it's true knowledge. But are you seeing the difference between truth and knowledge?
Yes. Yeah, I can see that. But knowledge is not what you're talking about with logos, really, right? Or would you say logos is knowledge?
Not quite, because the logos is its reason itself, its intelligence itself, but it is not yet expressed. So you could think of it as unmanifest knowledge. Logos would be unmanifest knowledge. So once intelligence itself or divine reason or creative order makes itself expressed in a certain idea that you could separate, that you could identify as different from another idea, the logos has been expressed as knowledge. So that's a step away from its origin. You know what I mean?
Okay. So then... I'm sorry. So how is the unified field logic? I'm sorry. Like, it's still not there for me. The premise being the unified field is logos. Those are the same thing.
Yeah.
That is still not quite connecting for me.
So it's not logic.
It might be for a lot of the audience. Like, there might be a lot of people that are like, how are you not getting this right now? But
there might be people who already turned this off because it's just uselessly abstract.
Maybe.
But that's fine. We're not really doing this for who's listening anyway.
Right.
So logic would be your ability to align a series of bits of knowledge in an unbroken pattern. That's logic. So if I say this keyboard is white and this is the same color as this keyboard, therefore this is white, there was no separation in that pattern. It was a continuous pattern.
Mm-hmm.
If I say this keyboard is white and this pen is similar, so this pen is white, like, wait, that wasn't logic because there was a separation between two of the bits of knowledge. So that wasn't a cohesive pattern. That wasn't a pattern that was connected the whole way through. There was a disconnect somewhere in that pattern, so it's not logical.
Mm-hmm.
So the importance of logic is that if you have something that's true and you know that it's true, then anything you can connect directly to that is also true.
Mm-hmm.
So logic is important for the same reason that it's important to be able to tell that a puzzle piece fits with another puzzle piece.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you know that this is the corner piece, this is the corner piece, this is the corner piece, and this is the corner piece, then you know if you keep connecting things to those, you will be able to create the whole picture.
Sure.
So you could be perfectly logical, but be operating from 4 false axiomatic presuppositions, and everything you ever say in your life is total bullshit, and you're perfectly logical. So that's logic.
Okay.
Now, the fact that there is even a structure or order to the puzzle in the first place is the logos.
Okay. So I think that I've just been considering what you're saying to be the logos. I had already lumped under truth in my head. Like, that sort of cognition that you're talking about, I had already put that under truth in my head, and so I was just having a hard time pulling that away from it.
Right.
But yeah, I would say that I still think that the information that is true and the ability to discern it and to like connect things, because I was kind of considering all of that under truth, I do agree. Yeah, I think that I would say that it makes sense that all of the knowledge and how to use it correctly, the way or the rules of how to use it correctly, could make up the unified field. I'm good with that.
And the I think like one of the thing that we're ultimately trying to do for the last few minutes is establish whether the logos is synonymous with the unified field and how the logos is differentiated from truth. How is the concept of truth and the concept of the logos different?
Yeah.
Well, they're synonyms. Love, truth, logos, spirit are all synonyms.
Right.
Because they're all names of God. They're all names of the unified field. They're all ways of articulating this level of reality that's so transcendent, we have to look at it from a few angles in order to get a good snapshot of it. For the same reason that if you had never seen a car before, you'd have to take a picture from like 6 different angles to really understand what the hell a car looks like.
Sure, yeah.
So I do think that they ultimately refer to the same phenomenon. Do you think it makes sense that there are 2 different descriptions of the unified field at this point, or does that still feel fuzzy? That truth is the standard of objective reality.
Truth
and
is the standard of objective reality.
Yeah, and the logos is creative intelligence or reason itself. Reason as such.
Like the ability to put things together, to like put different bits of information together.
No, it's not so the reason that it's good to have the ability to put things together is because there is an underlying structure to things in the first place. Because without the logos, you could have the ability to put things together and it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter if you put things together because there's no underlying structure for things to line up with. So if you have 4 ideas and they're all in the wrong order and you move them to the right order, there was only a right order because there was an underlying structure the whole time. And that eternal underlying structure to life is the logos. But that's also the true order to put them in. So it's truth in a sense too, but logos is specifically the fact that there is an underlying reason, an underlying structure, an underlying order to all of being. And I would think that the unified field, just like it sets the standard of objective reality of what's true, it would be the very most fundamental scaffolding of being, the very most fundamental structure or divine order as well. That's what I would think.
Okay. Like, I think I'm getting it. Maybe we should move on to the next one.
Sure.
And maybe it'll end up making more sense with other words as well. Like maybe the categorization will make more sense to me once I know all the words.
But if we're going to sit here and bullshit about the logos for 45 minutes and nobody would ever want to listen to it, I'm good with that too. So
that's okay.
If you want to go back to it and fuck with it all night, we can.
Okay, cool.
Spirit. Spirit means something like animating force. So if I tell you, like, me and Evan hung out yesterday, and you said, in what spirit, you're asking, what was the force that animated me to do that? In what spirit did I hang out with Evan? Was it lust? It was. What was the force? What was the intention? What was the inspiration that drove you to do that? You say someone acted in the spirit of poor sportsmanship, or spirit of sportsmanship more often. Of the good kind.
Yeah.
You could say that someone did something with a spirit of vengeance. So you're identifying lust when I just want to get on Evan. Or you're identifying sportsmanship, or you're identifying vengeance as the force, the metaphysical substrate that you couldn't quite clearly define, that you know is some kind of underlying energy animating you to do or say something. And so that is a kind of spirit. So spirit itself, in the Message translation, they say God is being, spirit itself. Or they say God is spirit, being itself.
God is spirit, being itself. Okay.
Yeah, being itself, as in being as such. Not, so you're a being, right? I'm a being. God is being. He isn't a being. He is being. He doesn't operate in a certain spirit. He is spirit. So anything that is animated in any way is animated by a certain kind of spirit, but every spirit is animated by spirit itself, the animating force of reality. And I would say that everything is animated by the unified field. The unified field is the kind of puppet master that is making everything do everything that it does.
Right. Making all the dirt do our dirt dance.
Yeah, exactly. All the dirt is dancing. All of the from dust to dust, from ashes to ashes. The thing, or Adam was molded from clay, and the spirit of God was breathed into Adam. So Adam is dust plus the breath of God, which is a metaphor for the spirit of God. So I say the unified field is spirit. It is animating force itself.
Yeah, no, I think that. I think that everything that is animate, everything that is like alive, is animated by some sort of spirit. I think that we have like something non-physical about us that exists and that we return to it. And that sure fits with the unified field as like, instead of it being like in like a heaven that you return to after you die, it's like, it's just this field that underlines everything. And you pop in to animate some dirt and then you slip right back into it and you can go kind of back in and out.
Mm-hmm.
That makes total sense to me. Yeah.
And I would think like to take that a step further, I would think that there are all sorts of little micro models that play out that same macro pattern. So the macro pattern, the macro narrative of the whole universe is everything was unified and it's separated. Hey, Evan, do you have any water?
I have some in there.
Can I drink a little bit?
Look at this.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it, bro.
Cool. I think that sometimes when people say something like, it's a straw, so leave it upright. But you also have to have it all the way open, so the straw is totally straight. Now it'll work. Nice. That was
the
fun.
hardest thing I've done all day.
I think that sometimes when people say things like what you're saying, that's not really things that people say a lot. Like those are like turns of phrase that I've heard, but it doesn't come up a lot in modern day, I think. But I do think that sometimes when people say things like, we had a spirited debate, or like in the spirit of goodwill, or like in the spirit of Christmas, like I do think that sometimes old texts may be referring to like that they think there was a spirit, or that there was some sort of, other than the people in the room, that there is something in the room driving it or something like that, which I would think would be sort of like a more micro version of it, that there would be, I think that there is like the big spirit, but then I think that some spirit can come off of that, animate something, and probably more spirit could come off of that, and that there could be like levels of spirits coming off of spirits that all slip back into themselves and eventually all the way back into the unified field. Yeah,
exactly. Eventually all the way back into
eventually all the way. Yeah.
That's the way that I would view things as well.
Yeah.
And that pattern, it's playing out like on every level of reality. That pattern is just playing out over and over and over and over and over again. Like you work out and your muscles, they tear apart and they come back together. And that's the same underlying pattern, the same that shares that macro narrative. Unity, separation, unity, separation, unity, separation. And yeah, we're doing this for fun. So we separated for fun, and we're now philosophizing about unity while we're separate for fun. Like we're fucking around.
Right.
I don't think it's that serious. And so there's a kind of unity that you could say was the unity before this separation we're experiencing now. And then you could say there is a kind of unity that is the unity after this separation we're experiencing now. We came from unity. We'll be at unity eventually. Whenever we get to that unity, we'll all separate and go fuck around again, right?
Right. It'll get boring right after we do.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But that's what alpha and omega means. God says, I am the alpha and the omega. I am the unity that was before anything. And I am in that same unity waiting at the end of everything.
Right. Yeah.
Because that field that we're talking about, it's not that it doesn't exist anymore. It exists right now, currently, somewhere. Like the field of unity is eternal and omnipresent. We don't have the eyes and ears to perceive it, to use the words that Jesus would use. We don't have the eyes and ears to perceive the kingdom of God, which is the eternal and fundamental and totally invincible unity. And it's here, and we're choosing not to experience it right now for whatever reason. So Alpha and Omega, it's the source creator of the universe and the destination of evolution. Yeah. It's what everything is evolving in the direction of. And it's all being pulled together to establish that kind of equanimity in direction of that harmony by the force of love. And that love is bringing everything to a certain standard of objective reality that is truth itself. And the fact that that underlying structure is there is the logos. And the whole thing is being animated by spirit. So all of these terms that in the Christian tradition are identified for God, I think also apply to the unified field. The eternal harmony, in perfect equanimity that is present right now that we can't perceive, and that we are practicing perceiving. We are separate, and this game is to find our way back to that unity, to walk each other home back to it.
Yeah.
And so, now that we're 50 minutes in, we can start the subject
Okay.
of the podcast.
All right.
Now, we're going to go through the rest, like, I don't know. We might take forever. Who cares?
Sure.
So, this macro narrative, right, that there was unity before anything, and now there's not, and hopefully there is again, it's alluded to in metaphor and story in the biblical tradition, whereas it is stated directly and explicitly in the Vedic tradition. You would think that this idea would be central to every religion, because this is what a religion is, a set of ideas that promote cohesion. And they promote cohesion because the universe is seeking that equanimity. But interestingly, it turns out that the unified field is alluded to in the first word of the Bible.
In?
No. The first word of the Bible is a Hebrew word. I've only seen it written. I've only read about it. I haven't heard it, so I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it's breshit. That's funny. Actually, the word shit is in it. B, which in Hebrew is pronounced bet, the letter bet. Well, let me start with the other part. So reshit is like the eternal and non-changing state of renewing and regenerating and moving.
Okay.
That's what reshit is.
Okay.
And then bet is, let me double check this part. This translation that I'm reading is from a book called The Kabbalistic Mirror of Genesis. Kabbalah is the mystical branch of Judaism. So in Kabbalah, in their
sorry, of Judaism. Okay.
yeah, of Judaism. So they had the Torah, which was the original 5 books of Moses, written by the guy Moses, or written by a group of people who had the title Moses, because it was kind of a vocation as much as it was an individual. There was a dude named Moses, but
So that's the first 5 books of the Bible, then, yeah?
yeah, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. I switched around Numbers and Leviticus, I think. But the Kabbalists were these dudes who studied the underlying mystical and universal qualities of the Torah and wanted to preserve those ideas. And so they had the Torah, and then they had the Zohar. And the Zohar was a book about interpreting the inner mystical meanings of the Torah. So it was like their manual for understanding the deepest meaning of the Torah. That was the Zohar.
Okay.
And so this is page 13 of the Kabbalistic Mirror of Genesis by David Chaim Smith. The first word of the Bible in Hebrew is breshit. This word is usually translated with the phrase in the beginning, but the interpretive translation with beginningness is preferred here. In Hebrew, the letter bet, B, is a prefix which signifies in or with. The word reshit refers to a continual state of becoming. This is the condition that all things are in. Breshit is the dynamic nature of creativity that presents total possibility. It is always unfolding fresh, new, and unique. The continual beginning is the volatile and playful disposition that can do or be anything, which displays itself as everything. When properly understood, breshit constitutes a direct assault on all conventional assumptions about the solidity of substance, the linear cohesiveness of time, and the integrity of thought. Conventional perception assumes that moments in time, appearances in space, and individual thoughts are separate, unrelated, random occurrences. The wisdom of breshit attacks this by asserting the changeless basis of continual change. So the first word of the Bible essentially says, the Genesis 1:1 is about acknowledging that the beginning of time was born out of an eternal and perpetual state of regeneration and transformation.
Oh, okay. So like time formed out of something timeless. Like time started out of something timeless.
Right.
Okay.
So in the Vedic tradition, they would break it down much more directly and just say the beginning of time was the first relative phenomena that emerged from the absolute. And it's like, well, you fucking really spelled it out there. The Bible is more poetic about it.
Right.
But
at least the original version is.
Right. And some modern translations. So here's one that I really like in the Message translation. And so I'm going to bounce back and forth for a minute between Genesis 1:1 and John 3:3, which are
Okay.
both also really pretty numbers. And there's this connection between a teaching of Jesus and Genesis and the first sentence of Genesis. And this is the first point that we're getting to about how the teachings of Jesus encourage this non-dual awareness that we've been talking about, this unity consciousness, this unity with the unified field. So Jesus said, this is John 3:3, you're not listening. He's talking to Nicodemus. Let me say it again. Unless a person submits to this original creation, the wind hovering over the water creation, the invisible moving the visible, a baptism into a new life, it's not possible to enter God's kingdom. When you look at a baby, it's just that, a body you can look at and touch. But the person who takes shape within is formed by something you can't see and touch, the spirit, and becomes a living spirit. Now
and becomes a living spirit.
Yes. Now here's Genesis 1:1 in the Message. So this is the same translation, the Message translation by Eugene Peterson. First this, God created the heavens and earth, all you see, all you don't see. Earth was a soup of nothingness, a bottomless emptiness, an inky blackness. God's spirit brooded like a bird above the watery abyss. So then, the reason I like reading these two verses in the Message translation is because that hovering over the water metaphor is used in both. So, John was like, in the Christian story, John was this wild, eccentric, dirty, crazy old prophet who was God's opener for Jesus. So it was his job to be like, yo, here's an example of an absolutely rogue teacher who teaches from truth, who teaches from the heart, not with religious authority. And people would be like, bro, who are you? Are you the Messiah that was prophesied? Are you the reincarnation of Elijah? What are you? And he would say...
This is John the Baptist we're talking about, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And he would say, I was prophesied in the scriptures, in the book of Isaiah. The one crying out in the wilderness, make the way straight for the Lord. So he was saying, oh yeah, I am prophesied in the books that you're reading, but not the Messiah, the guy who sets up for the Messiah.
Right. I'm the guy that's prophesied to prophecy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so he says, I baptize with water, because he was doing these religious rituals where he would take people to water and he would say, the kingdom is at hand, the kingdom is available to you, you need to repent, something important is coming. And he would dunk people in water as this symbol, look, you're clean, get a new life, go out there and quit fucking around. And he would tell people, I baptize with water, but one is coming who will baptize with spirit. So now Jesus has arrived, and he's saying, in reference to the first sentence of Genesis, unless a person submits to the original creation, the wind hovering over the water creation, that's a reference to God's spirit brooded like a bird above the watery abyss. So submit to the original state when consciousness itself in its pure form was seeing nothing but pure empty potentiality. Unless a person submits to this original creation, the wind hovering over the water creation, the invisible moving the visible, a baptism into a new life, it's not possible to enter God's kingdom. So what he's saying there is, unless you re-experience the very first awakening of consciousness that had to manifest into nothingness, you will not be able to enter the state of unity consciousness. Re-experience the moment that we, at our core, awakened for the first time as spirit itself, as God. He's inviting you to go back and experience that again. And that's what Genesis Meditations by Neil Douglas Klotz is about. It's about an ancient practice that was used by Jews, Muslims, and Christians to re-experience what it's like to exist or be born for the very first time.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it sounded to me like it was like, and this might be kind of the same thing you're saying, but you have to achieve unity consciousness to win the game, to go back to God. Is that kind of the same thing you're saying?
Well, he's referring to a psychic event, a psychological event, an inner experience that can happen to you where you, because what he's offering is a shortcut to unity consciousness. I don't think he's saying you have to experience unity consciousness to find the kingdom of God. I think kingdom of God and unity consciousness are synonymous. And he's offering you a kind of meditation that you can do. And Neil Douglas Klotz elaborates out this argument that Jesus taught this original practice. And if you use your imagination to re-experience what it was like to awaken for the first time as being itself, that is a shortcut to attaining unity consciousness, because that is the re-experiencing of the one experience that is the common denominator of all experience. The one thing that every single person, every single thing, every force, every particle experienced at the beginning of time. The very first one. And for those who are just listening to audio, I just pretended to like wake up like a baby who's overwhelmed by stimulus.
I was confused by it for a moment.
Yeah. That's the original awakening. Hovering over the waters. That's a poetic way of saying facing nothing but potentiality and perfect darkness. So, and understanding the meaning of Breshit, that Jesus is saying you have to re-experience the emergence of being, or not being, because being itself is the unified field too. The emergence of creation from creator, right? You have to experience that yourself. And that's something that you do within you, because he says the person who takes shape within is formed by something you can't see and touch, the spirit. So it's something you have to close your eyes and do with your imagination.
Or, I mean, but it sounds like he's saying there, he's referencing that literally your body is animated by something inanimate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your body is a manifestation of the unmanifest. Yeah.
And that like there's a spirit inside of you and it's forming what the person's going to look like. And it's not just you. There's like a spirit in you. But it sounded like you were saying, like you disagreed with my interpretation.
Which one?
That what I just said. What were we just saying?
You said that maybe he's saying you have to attain unity consciousness to enter the kingdom of God.
Oh, okay. Yeah. After that, though, I said that it sounds like he's saying he's just saying there is a spirit in you that animates you. But I thought that you were saying that he's saying something else, that what he's saying is that something about a process you have to do within yourself. And I'm not sure what you're saying different than what I think he's saying.
The fact that you have to, I'm trying to clarify your question. I think your question is, and let's take our time with this. It's fine. I think your question was, is it that there is a spirit in you that's animating you? You were wondering whether I disagreed with that.
Not quite.
Okay.
You had said something about how Jesus said there's a spirit in you that animates you, and then you said something like, and I think by this, what he means is that you need to do something internal, or that there's some personal thing that you need to do within yourself in order to achieve something. Like you were interpreting the idea that there's a spirit in you that animates, and you're using that as reasoning that there is some specific process Jesus is saying you need to do.
Okay, let me try to answer it, because I'm still not quite clear on your question. So let me answer what I think you might be asking, and then you can tell me where I'm not understanding, maybe, if I'm wrong. So there is a single spirit that animates everything in existence. You could say that there are a bunch of separate spirits and souls, but they are all just kind of you could say that they're a slice on the light spectrum of God, and God is light itself, not any individual slice on the spectrum.
Yeah.
There are all these different spirits and souls in the universe, and particles and forces and everything.
Yeah, and I view spirit and soul as kind of I view those words in the same way. And yeah, I'm with you. Like you could view it either that there is, that like, yes, I have a spirit. I think there is a spirit in me that will eventually return to God, but it is a part of the spirit.
Yeah.
I see that both. I see, yeah.
So we make the same distinction between a spirit and the spirit. And Jesus is saying the person who takes shape within is formed by something you can't see and touch, the spirit.
Oh, the person that takes shape within is animated. Sorry, what was the rest of it?
The person who takes shape within is formed by something you can't see and touch, the Spirit.
Right. Okay. So this was kind of an the thing, because
Interesting.
you're saying big God Spirit is the thing that Jesus is referencing, and I agree. I think you're right. I was thinking that it was just a spirit, and it was Jesus more saying the person, the body, like the adult that you will form to be, is controlled by the spirit inside you, or by a spirit inside you. And because of that, you had made some sort of more
Made a claim about a
religious
process
claim.
that you have to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
I do think it was an AV thing mostly.
But there might be something that I'm trying to say that I still haven't communicated.
Okay.
It is that, so there is a spirit within, there is the Spirit, and it is within you, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you know that spirit is what animates you, because you have personally, firsthand, remembered and experienced all over again the moment that spirit was born, the Spirit. You remember the very beginning of time. You've gone back and you've had a direct recollection of it, so that you know for sure you are the Spirit that is currently in the form of a human being. In that case, you are a living spirit. If you're not that, you are spiritually dead. You're unaware of your own fundamental nature. You're unaware of that most fundamental nature that you share with all things. So you are spiritually dead. So he is advocating that you engage in a kind of meditation practice, a kind of inner transformation, baptism of spirit. He's saying the person who takes shape within is formed by something you can't see and touch, the Spirit, and becomes a living spirit, becomes a spirit who is aware that it is the Spirit. That's what it's like to be a living spirit.
And so to be
You're
a
not
living
fundamentally
spirit,
confused about your own nature if you've gone through this kind of initiation that he's referring to.
and so he is saying that if you are a living spirit, if you have lived that moment, if you've done that ritual to feel that moment,
Yeah.
the benefit of that would be it would be a shortcut back to God, or is that just the way? Like that's end game.
Yeah. Both. Yeah.
Okay.
That is he's trying to give you the simplest way to awaken.
That is that's really interesting. I think it's I think you're right. That is like, that does sound like what he's saying, and if it's true, it is interesting what a like shortcut Jesus threw in to like get into heaven.
Right.
But I guess most people think there's a way better shortcut in it, and it's just that you got to go, I believe in Jesus.
Yep.
That's the shortcut.
And that's gay as fuck.
That's not a good short. That
is nonsense.
not a good answer.
Right.
Yeah.
So to read this one more time now that we've beaten them to death.
Yeah.
Genesis 1:1. First this, God created the heavens and earth. And obviously, I don't agree with Eugene Peterson's translation of the first two words of Genesis. I think it's saying something much deeper than he has the paradigm to detect. First this, God created the heavens and earth. All you see, all you don't see. Earth was a soup of nothingness, a bottomless emptiness, an inky blackness. God's Spirit brooded like a bird above the watery abyss. In the beginning of time, God's Spirit brooded like a bird above the watery abyss. Jesus, John 3:3. You're not listening, Nicodemus. Let me say it again. Unless a person submits to this original creation, the wind hovering over the water creation, the invisible moving the visible, a baptism into a new life, it's not possible to enter God's kingdom. And then he says, but the person who takes shape within is formed by something you can't see and touch, the Spirit, and becomes a living spirit. So he's telling you to do the most fundamental and deep thing you can possibly do in reference to the very first sentence of the entire Bible.
That's cool.
That's sick.
I also really like, it's kind of a separate thing, but I like the imagery of God being like just sort of bored over the void, like kind of wanting something to happen. Like he's brooding over the abyss. Like he's kind of waiting for something to happen. He wishes something would happen. That's kind of an interesting image.
I wasn't really familiar with the word brooding. I was just mainly paying attention to the connection of the water.
It's kind of sulking, or like just sort of thinking deep thoughts in a lonely way. Is there, you got a definition there?
No, I just like your word lonely, because lonely does remind me of being broody. And so that connects for me why that's a good adjective for that.
Right. Like the character,
Broody.
when I think of brooding, I think of the character Angel on Buffy and Angel. Like
Right.
He was,
Right, me too.
people always just called him the brooding guy. And he's a good like stereotype of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was lonely. He was a vampire and he lived in like a cave or a cemetery or something stupid.
Yeah, and he did a bunch of bad stuff and he felt sad about it.
Right.
And he thought about it all the time alone.
Right.
Yeah.
So God loitered in a lonely spirit over the void.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
That's really sick.
Yeah.
You know, in Jordan Peterson's recent interview on Lex Fridman, they talked about the contemplation of the void. They talked about staring into the abyss, and Lex Fridman advocated against staring into the abyss. And Jordan Peterson said, well, you haven't looked long enough, because if you look long enough, you see light through it. And Peterson referenced the fact that he would contemplate death on an almost constant basis throughout graduate school. That was as he was writing Maps of Meaning, which is unbelievable. And he says that he pretty much, he feels that he stares into the abyss continuously.
Right. Yeah.
That seems like an effort to constantly live out what's being said here, but there also still seems to be, in Peterson's case, this obsession with perceiving something that is angsty in a self-righteous way. Like his staring into the abyss to see the light through it hasn't seemed to result in the joy that one has when they realize that this game of life is eternal and fundamentally unserious. Even though you can take it, it's very, very sincere. Like Alan Watts says, something doesn't have to be serious to be very sincere. Playing music isn't serious, but it's very sincere. It's not like this doesn't matter. Of course this matters, but it matters for fun.
Right.
Peterson does have this kind of attachment to like, suffering, and I didn't sleep for 4 months, and I AIDS from a apple cider vinegar, and it's why I only eat meat, and like things like have to be difficult. He has to have this constant angst. There's this kind of self-important attachment to that.
Right.
It doesn't seem like he has let himself fall into that joy.
Right. He has that vision that I think about a lot. He described like I think this was when he was on shrooms, but he didn't explicitly say that in this context. But he said that he had a vision where he was like in a coliseum. He found himself in a coliseum and God was watching, and like the literal devil came out and he had to fight him for a long time. And when he eventually killed the devil, he asked God, like, why'd you do that to me? And God said, because I knew you could handle it.
Right.
And
if he would have taken that vision all the way, he would have taken a turn being God, watching this self-righteous, angsty little protagonist, this Batman needing a Joker, this complex, this hero obsession, right? And watched it play out and gone, oh, God, this is fucking ridiculous.
Right. It is, from a certain perspective, very funny. But it is also, from another perspective, sincerely heroic and like amazing.
Yeah.
That he wants to do that.
Right.
But you don't have to want to do that, but someone's going to want to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't.
And he wants to fight the devil in a coliseum.
And 3 of the 12 fundamental archetypes are the hero, the outlaw, and the jester. And so the hero's point is, I'm going to save the world. And the outlaw's point is, I'm going to give you an excuse to save the world. And the jester's point is, you guys are both fucking stupid. This whole thing is a joke, right? And all 3 of those perspectives are valid. Like, those are all valid games to play.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with playing any of those games.
Totally.
But I feel that if I give Peterson credit for wanting to be a hero and going out and looking for an enemy, it's like I'm almost buying into a game that I'm trying to learn to zoom out of. You know, like as a person who's playing I'm trying to get enlightenment game. I'm trying to play sage archetype. And so I don't want to glorify hero archetype in a way that tempts me to it. You know what I mean?
I get what you're saying. Yeah, it doesn't make me feel that... I suppose to an extent it does. Like, I feel a little bit of that.
Doesn't it make you want to find an enemy in the news or somewhere?
Sometimes, but, like, I do have a little bit of, like, wanting to be a hero, like, wanting to have something to to fight against. So maybe like admiring that does like make it rub off on me, or maybe that's just naturally like a part of me, and it is also naturally a part of him, and so I end up respecting it more than you do, or like more, not that you don't, but that I don't feel any qualms about it because I
think
just
you
think
respect it more than I do.
Okay. That I don't have any like qualms about looking at it and being like, that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool game he's playing, what he's doing there. Like,
No, I feel that too.
yeah.
I do feel that too. I get swept up in it when I'm watching it. When
Sure.
I'm watching him be heroic, I'm like, let's go.
Which you
but
should.
when I'm sitting back talking about it. And I mean,
It's a story. You're
In
getting
every
into
fight
it.
I've ever seen him in, he has been the good guy, and I mean that genuinely. I
Yeah.
don't just mean like that there's an arbitrary definition between who's right and who's wrong. Every time I've seen him engage in some kind of social conflict, like, well, that's the good guy in that situation, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like this guy is like willing to ruin his life to stand up for something that's true.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay, we got to move on.
It's really brave of us to finally defend Jordan Peterson.
I know, right? Finally, because we've been so critical of him, and it's like, it's just time to give the devil his due.
Right.
So, I want to touch on some of the core teachings of Jesus and how they are about non-duality, and maybe you can help me sort these out. So, Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment? He's asked by somebody who's kind of trying to catch him, like, hey, there's all these different laws, right? So which one's the best? Maybe I can kind of get ya. And
Right.
Jesus says, the first and greatest commandment is love the Lord, love God with all of your heart, all of your strength, and all of your mind. Or you could say that's love God with all of your body, all of your mind, and all of your soul. Or, love God physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, and the second commandment is this, that you love your neighbor as yourself. So the first one is, I think, about orienting every single aspect of yourself in the direction of the divine, which we have been defining as the unified field in this discussion. And to me, so he's saying, love God with every part of you. But since love is that universal force
Mm-hmm.
that is seeking to create equanimity and harmony in being, you could say that the fact that he's saying love God and love and God also are synonymous.
Right. So it's love.
Yeah, love, or God. So essentially he's saying align everything within you with truth, love, God, because we've already covered the fact that in the Christian tradition, these are presented as synonyms.
Mm-hmm.
So love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. It's like saying align every aspect of yourself with God. So organize everything around you around God as the unifying principle.
Mm-hmm. And it's clear in the verse that you do that first, right? I can't remember the phrasing of it.
It is, yeah. He does say
this,
the greatest commandment is this. And then he says, and the second is like it.
which he didn't even ask for, but...
Right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, because the guy asked which commandment is the best.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus chooses to give him two.
Mm-hmm.
He says the first commandment is love the Lord thy God with all your heart, strength, and mind. And then he says, and the second is like it, love thy neighbor as thyself.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So you could say the first commandment is establish unity internally. And the second commandment is establish unity externally.
Yeah. The way that I saw it was like align yourself with God. If you get on the same frequency as God, then you act like if you love God, if you love love, then you become more love. You become lovier and you become more aligned with that. And then you act as like a satellite for that. And then at that point, love your neighbors because then you can really love them.
For sure.
Now you're really synced up. Now you're not you. You're like a satellite for God. And
Right.
now you can really do some loving.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, to be clear, I want to clear up a piece of that language because I think that the more aligned you are with God, the more you are. Like, here's a parable. So the color green it gets confused and it can't remember how to be green. So it starts asking around, what kind of things are green? Oh, the couch in the studio, the water bottle that Raleigh has, the grass outside. And so it's trying to act like a couch. It's trying to act like a water bottle. It's trying to act like a blade of grass, but it cannot fucking remember how to be green. And then somebody says, just lighten up. Just be light. And it decides to try to be light instead. And being light, it becomes the slice of the light spectrum that we call green, and it returns to being green.
Yeah.
So similarly, if you're trying to be yourself instead of pursuing God, then you are losing yourself in relative concepts rather than aligning yourself with that which is absolute, bringing you further from rather than closer to your fundamental identity. And that's why Jesus says, if you try to get, what is it? Because he says if you give up everything for God, then you get your life. But if you try to save your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for God, you'll save it. Let me look up that saying to see exactly what it says.
I really like that sort of idea of like becoming more yourself by becoming like closer with God. Like I like that thematically. I think because of how like scary that is, like aligning, like you're giving up things. You may be giving up things that you think are extremely important to who you are. There are things that like I waste time on that a part of me wants to give up, but they kind of feel like, wow, but that's like part of me. And like if I were to go to God, I might have to give up something that I don't necessarily want to give up, but it's like it's an act of faith, or like it's a trust fall.
A sacrifice.
Yeah, a leap of faith, and a sacrifice too, like and a sacrifice and you're hoping that afterwards you're going to be okay, that like you're still going to be you.
Right.
I suppose there's something that just makes sense about that to me, that feels like a lot of what the game is, like having enough faith in God that it is going to be okay no matter what you have to give up. Yeah.
Is there any way that concept that you just brought up, the concept of giving up something that you identify with yourself, like the equivalent of green, not trying to be the couch or the water bottle anymore, whatever that is for you, is there anything about that connects back to the unified field idea?
I don't know. So like the thing that like comes to mind in my head is like the video game Skyrim. A part of me thinks that I should just give that up because it occupies too much of my mind when I'm playing it, that it needs to just be given up. So does that relate to the unified field? Can you I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Maybe nothing. I'm just pulling a random thread. I'm not trying to go anywhere with it.
Okay.
I'm just trying to tie concepts back to the unified field and just trying to brainstorm, like, because I mean, the point of this presentation is for me to discussion is for me to try to flesh out how can I connect the teachings of Jesus back to the task of attaining unity consciousness.
Yeah, I don't quite see how to. I think you could say that it's a lie, an untruth, that I believe that video game matters or is worth my time or is like important to my identity or anything like that. That is like an untruth. That's like a lie that I think, like it might be a lie that I think, and that if I go to God, he might take it from me because he's truth. Connected kind of that way.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I was thinking it could also be like, if everybody behaves exactly the way that God intends them to, then green is perfect green, red is perfect red, blue is perfect blue, and I guess the rainbow is organized correctly, because the rainbow being properly laid out is like the equivalent of the puzzle being done. So maybe right now the puzzle isn't done. We don't have harmony because I'm doing something he's supposed to be doing, he's doing something you're supposed to be doing, and you're doing something I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of the reason that things just feel out of whack in our experience.
I wouldn't recommend trying to get into Skyrim, though.
I won't. I won't. But I am going to get into the first season of True Detective.
It's
and I'm
so
going to let that
good.
eat up a little time.
It's the best thing.
Playing a video game that tells a great story can be a really, really healthy and
Totally.
integrating and useful thing to do. And
Totally.
Same with watching a great show or a great movie.
Right. Yeah. Like I'm certainly not disparaging video games. I think a good video game story is as important as any other kind of story. And I think stories matter a lot. I think they
Right.
can be really uplifting and important. And I think that multiplayer video games can be an important bonding experience that brings a lot of
dude.
joy to the world.
Yeah. And an outlet for the inner competitor that doesn't get much these days. Like, we don't beat the shit
Totally.
out of each other, but me and you
Totally.
and Jared and Jake and Derek sitting down and Evan and who else? I feel like there was
Luke,
someone else there.
maybe?
Oh, yeah. Well, Luke was hanging out. I don't
Yeah.
think he hopped on Smash Bros. But all of us getting on the TV and beating the shit out of each other with these little avatars is like,
Yeah.
there's a part of us that needs to do that in some form. And
Yeah.
that's super healthy.
Right. Skyrim, I just say, is like a bad one in that it can become like it can be repetitive and for me like obsessive. Like it doesn't make me grow playing it in any way. Or it doesn't connect me to anything. Like if I replay Ocarina of Time, like it does reconnect me to things in myself, and like it's a story that I like a lot, and I think there's a lot of value in video games. So don't think I'm disparaging them.
Right.
Yeah.
The verse, I looked it up. English Standard Version. I like that translation. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And that's Jesus speaking. And so I think it's really useful to read Scripture as though when Jesus speaks, it is the unified field itself speaking. Because I think people read the New Testament and they get to the lines of Jesus and they read it as though the most important historical figure of all time is speaking in that line. But they project onto that all of their ideas about what might constitute importance in a historical figure. But if you see it as the unified field speaking, for whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. If the force that created and holds together the whole universe and sets the standard of love, truth, and maybe even beauty is saying, lose your life for my sake, like that makes perfect sense. That's,
Sure.
it's still abstract, it's still poetic, but
Yeah. No, I think I think that's a good way to view it, but
because when people try to lose their life for the sake of a historical figure that they have a bunch of ideological assumptions about, it can be disintegrating.
oh, so you're saying that you think it's like a bad idea for a Christian to view that as though it is Jesus who's saying you need to die for this guy, this person right here.
Well, if they use Jesus as a name for the divine because there was a perfect
Right.
human being named Jesus, then I would think that's healthy. But yeah, like it's like if I think Abraham Lincoln was a saint, right? But if I tried to lose my life for the sake of Abraham Lincoln, like that would be some kind of pathological obsession. Like
Sure.
that's not good. Like,
Yeah.
hey, dude, Abraham Lincoln doesn't give a fuck about you. And I don't think it's really, I don't know how deeply it's really understood. It's at least not explicitly understood. It's not articulated well in most Christian circles what is meant by the terms Jesus, Holy Spirit, and God. Because it's terrifyingly common to hear the phrase, one God, three persons. Persons?
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think about that.
Look up the
Persons.
definition of person. Human. It means human. They're saying God is three humans, the Father, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus. And they visualize three human beings sitting somewhere dictating things and use their names interchangeably. And all of it's just like, I don't feel like the concepts are defined well enough to be that healthy. It freaks me out. So if it was like my kid who I got to teach how to interpret the Bible, that's what I would tell them. It's like, it's not a historical figure speaking. That person is a mouthpiece for the underlying unity of the whole universe, trying to teach everything to become more loving.
Sure.
Read it like that. That is not a historical figure. It's something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think of persons differently. That's a translation of something. That was like the three persons thing. What is that from? Where does it say three persons?
I don't know. I just know hella churches say that. I've been to a lot of churches. I've listened to a lot of sermons. Like, people fucking say that really commonly.
Oh, okay. So it's not
That's
like
just a
necessarily
popular idea.
Right.
I don't know if it's in scripture. I don't know where it comes from. I just hear a lot of pastors say that.
Right. A lot of ideas are not. A lot of them are just like.
Yeah, a third of the angels, that's like a vague translation of a shroom trip from the book of Ezekiel. That's not like the Bible is like, hey, here's the story. Like, that's some weird offhand abstract vision that's then like pieced together and like, okay, here's the story. And then that's just become the accepted narrative. A third of the angels fell from heaven.
Right.
What the fuck do we mean by heaven? What the fuck do we mean by angels? What the fuck do we mean by fall?
Yeah.
It's just like, it gets really strange.
Yeah. I happened to listen to the Jinn episode the other day. I think it was 37. But you said the same thing in that. And I think Evan then clarified that it does say in one of the Mormon books that the third of the angels thing. Is that right? Yeah. So it says it in a Mormon book. So maybe it's like, maybe that's kind of the original source of it. And it's being
maybe
like more
just leaked
broadly
out.
taken on. I don't know.
Maybe. So Jesus said this other thing. He said something else.
What did he say now? He's always talking.
He's talking and talking. Okay, so the golden rule, I mean, to connect this one to the unified field is cake. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's because you're all one.
Right.
You know?
Right. Because you are you. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're your neighbor.
Carl Jung says in the Red Book, or one of his weird characters in his head says in the Red Book, whatever it was, like, man will sin against man not knowing that he is him.
Mm-hmm.
That's the fundamental ignorant idea. That is like the birthplace of ignorance. The idea that things are fundamentally separate is just absolute nonsense. It's like saying the first number in the universe that ever existed was the number 2. Like, there wasn't anything before 2. We're fundamentally separate.
Right.
Like, that's at the deepest level, that's our nature. We're separate. It's just totally incoherent.
Right. It is like it is really. It's so many things are funny when you zoom way out and you like look at them from a certain perspective. Like the idea of stealing from someone is just, if you zoom out far enough, hilarious.
Right.
Like you're taking from yourself and being like, yes, I got away with it. And it's like you're watching you steal from you. It's insane.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why God has unconditional grace and love, is because he has that perspective that he sees this is all me sinning against me. And that's a really terrible thing to say to somebody who just got raped. Like, actually, that's God.
You know what's really funny
God.
about this?
Like,
you're going to laugh when I tell you.
Dude, that what happened to you, it was actually just a big punchline.
It's a goof, God.
Right. Yeah. It's just God goofing around.
Yeah.
There's it's the more attached you get to the idea that you are a perpetrator or a victim, the more you have started to try to embody this crazy idea that you're fundamentally separate from other things.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Lord's Prayer, it says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Or as Neil Douglas Klotz says, untangle the rainbows. And that's because if all of the debts are released, then everything returns to the state of unity. Because part of the obstacle to seeing unity is the resentments that everybody holds against other people. It's really easy to think of you as separate from me as long as I'm mad at you for something.
Right, because I owe you something. How can I be you? I owe you.
Yeah.
We can't merge until our debts are settled.
Right.
Then we can talk about it, but no, you owe me.
Right. So how absurdly would one behave if they were certain they were not separate from anyone? Jesus said, if someone strikes you across the face, give them your other cheek. He said, if someone takes your coat, give them another coat. Imagine if someone they would actually do that. If they really thought nothing was separate, if you walked up to somebody and started beating the shit out of them and stealing from them, they'd be like, oh, yeah, do your worst, man. Here, you have the rest of my shit. What are you going to do? You're going to take my shit. It's not mine anymore. Now you have it. Oh, it's not me. It's you.
Right.
not my things. It's like God stole a piece of God from a piece of God. Like, okay, dude,
Yeah.
you got me. You would have that kind of detachment.
Yeah.
And maybe that level of realization is the reason that nearly all of the apostles or disciples who followed Jesus were willingly murdered for doing so.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know that.
Like most of the 12 ended up getting killed for just going around and saying like, hey man, he's not the real king. The real king is just this cosmic love that surrounds this whole thing. But they were so confident, so articulate, so powerful, so charismatic. They were such leaders that it was just like, shut that fucking guy up.
Right.
Like, hang that guy.
Right.
I do not need this guy telling people that love is the king instead of me.
Yeah. There's not a lot of power you can exercise over someone who is absolutely certain that you have none.
Right.
There's nothing you can do.
Right. Absolutely. Jesus was talking to Pontius Pilate, and he asked Jesus, like, because Jesus isn't like begging for his life, right? And the guy's like, you know that I have the authority to have you crucified, right? And Jesus says, you only have that authority temporarily because it's given to you by God. And then Pontius Pilate is like, I'm going to do everything I can to get you out of this, man. And he tries to convince everybody. Everybody's like, no, fuck that guy. And they end up crucifying him. But obviously Pontius Pilate was impacted by that interaction with him. Him just being like, hey, man, I mean, you can do something to me, but what are we doing?
Right. He doesn't seem to have wanted to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was literally his response to that question. That wasn't me just connecting two different conversations.
He literally said, I am going to do everything I can to help you.
Yeah. He really, I'm abridging the wording, but he really did say, don't you know I have the authority to crucify you? And Jesus says, you only have that authority because it was temporarily given to you by God. And he says, all right, I'm going to do everything I can to get you out of this, man. He says that in response to that.
Interesting.
Into that answer.
Yeah.
Because he's like, yeah, I mean, this guy's just a genius. I mean, what are you going to do with this guy?
Yeah.
Like, just let him go.
Yeah.
But in the Lord's Prayer, so Abunda Bwashmaya, the first two words, are about reminding yourself of the all-pervading total nature of God. And then Netkadashmak, the second phrase, which is typically hallowed be thy name, is about acknowledging the source, the center within you, and calling everything to align with it, emptying your heart of your own individual intention, so that place, heart being a metaphor for the central intention around which you are oriented, can be filled by God, not by something that you put there. And so, Abuna Mashmai Netkadashmak, and the Tete Makuta is, I acknowledge that God is the ruler and rules for the sake of harmony. And then, Abuna Mashmai Netkadashmak Tete Makuta, Newe Sebinake Kanada Bashmaya Ababara is saying everything should dance around the central point that is God, or everything is ultimately walking in step with God. Like when you look at the fully elaborated translation of the Lord's Prayer, the whole thing is about acknowledging the centrality of God and orienting everything within you and around you around it, and picturing, in order to manifest a certain outcome, the whole universe being oriented around that central principle once again, like it should be. The whole thing is about that. But so just to go through the King James translation.
Sure.
So our Father who art in heaven. So that is saying the transcendent force that exists where things are perfect. Hallowed be thy name. So let's continue to acknowledge that you are divine and you are ultimate.
What's interesting is like how widely that is more interpreted as like, God, you're not here right now.
I know.
God,
it's become
you're not here, you're over there. I'm here, you're there.
Right, exactly. God who is absent. It's like
you're not here right now. Sorry.
There's this youth group who made this ridiculous dub over like a cheesy old Jesus movie, and Jesus says, I did all these miracles so I could tell you guys, you're all evil. There's no hope. That's all. And the line Father who art in heaven is almost that absurd. It is almost as like the whole message is God is with you. God will never leave you. It's all around you. It's all within you. Move everything that you own and that is around you in that direction. It's all going to be all right. And we end up with the first word of the prayer recommended by God himself is Father who art in heaven, like Father who is separate from us, like
Right. Our absentee dad.
Right. But heaven meaning the perfect state of the universe. It makes perfect sense, but yeah, it's so crazy. So Father who art in heaven, transcendent force in the perfect state, hallowed be thy name. Let us continue to acknowledge your divinity is what it's saying there. Hallowed be thy name. And then
Thy kingdom come.
Yeah, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So, or Eugene Peterson says, as above, so below, instead of on earth as it is in heaven. And that's saying, make the relative like the absolute. Make this finite world like the infinite world. Make this place of form and separation like the eternal unification that is supreme. It's using symbols to say that. Because like Neil Douglas Klotz says about Scripture, there is the literal level, the metaphorical level, and the universal or mystical level. And that translation is just an interpretation only from the literal and or metaphorical level. Like, Father who art in heaven, that's metaphor. Hallowed be thy name, that's metaphor. Thy kingdom come. Thy kingdom come. Thy kingdom come? That is like the most far out metaphor. Like, thy kingdom come. So a kingdom, right? As in a political structure, come. Like that can move. Like you're asking a political structure to physically move. It's like the most ridiculous metaphor.
Like imperial expansion, like an empire expanding into an area out of heaven into earth where he's not right now.
Dude, good call. Yeah. It sounds more ridiculous to me in 2022.
Yeah,
probably than it did at the time.
They're not moving their castle. They're just also taking that castle.
Right. So like you leave your castle and take over ours. Yeah. But still the universal or mystical meaning is may the absolute overcome the relative. May light overcome darkness. May truth overcome our perceived separation from it. And then on earth as it is in heaven, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. I think that's the next part.
Sounds right.
Which we already talked about. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. That it's like don't lead us into temptation is a way of saying don't let us get so attached to objective form that we forget what really matters. And the things that really matter are in step, in unison with the divine, with the eternal, with God. So that right there is also requesting that God help you not get caught up in the relative. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. And deliver us from the evil one, I don't think that's saying like, don't let us get trapped by the devil, is how it's assumed. I don't think in the original Aramaic translation that Neil Douglas Klotz did, there is even any reference to the devil.
I think King James is deliver us from evil.
Oh, yeah. Not the evil one. Oh, thank you. Yeah, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. You're right.
Okay.
So here's Neil's translation. I call him Neil now because we're buds.
Yeah, my boy Neil.
my boy Neil actually sounds bad. That's kind of a lame name. Don't let surface things delude us, but free us from what holds us back. Don't let us enter forgetfulness, the temptation of false appearances. To the fraud of inner vacillation, like a flag tossed in the wind, alert us. But break the hold of unripeness, the inner stagnation that prevents good fruit. From the evil of injustice, the green fruit and the rotten, grant us liberty. Deceived neither by the outer nor the inner, free us to walk your path with joy. Keep us from hoarding false wealth and from the inner shame of help not given in time. Don't let surface things delude us, but free us from what holds us back. So that's his full elaboration on, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Okay.
So I think that's about staying in unity, not getting caught up in relative forms, and not getting swept up in things that are temporary. That's something that Jesus goes back to a lot. That's something that I can bring up in the project is like Jesus says, don't store up treasures here where they blah, blah, blah. Store up treasures in heaven. I think that's a way of saying it's safe to get addicted to things that are eternal, and it is not safe to get addicted to things that are temporary. So I think that would be saying you can get addicted to truth and love and justice and joy, things that are going to have continuity through all of creation.
Right.
But don't get addicted to a video game or a building or a job or like some temporary identity, because that's all storing up heavens on earth instead of treasures. Treasures on earth instead of treasures in heaven.
Yeah. I think, I was going to say that maybe, the physical treasures are pointless, but not unsafe. They're like, maybe safe isn't the right way, but safe is kind of like, safe is also like a term for a box that you would put money in. Like, like it is safe to gather joy and to gather wisdom and to gather love. Like those things go in the safe, but
that's an interesting connection.
The other things don't. But maybe safe isn't the right word. Maybe it's like significant or valuable, like that.
Yeah, I like valuable.
Yeah.
My reasoning for using safe is it's safe to get addicted to joy because joy will never let you down. So what I'm saying is like, if you get addicted to something temporary, there's a guarantee that you will suffer at some point in the future as a result of that attachment. If you get addicted to something that's eternal, there's a guarantee that you will never suffer as a result of that attachment, because it's going to last forever. There's never going to be like, oh, fuck, we ran out of truth. These, what do you call like our whole global connection of sending products here and there? What do you call all that? People keep going, the blank is messed up. You can't buy nothing.
Oh, the supply chain.
Yeah, the supply chain. You're even like, oh, the supply chain is all messed up. I can't get any truth. I can't get any love.
Right.
That's never going to be a problem.
Right.
Or I can't get access to that spirit which Jesus embodied. It's just, we ran all out.
Yeah.
But addicted to anything temporary, a job, you're going to randomly get fired after 10 years being the best guy in the office. Like that shit's going to happen eventually. Some bullshit is going to happen. If you're addicted to that, it's not safe, meaning it will eventually result in suffering. That's what I meant by safe. But I like valuable more. It's better.
Yeah.
But deliver us from evil. For yours is the power and the glory and the kingdom forever. Amen. That line is interesting because it's like putting all these words that humans think are sexy on God. Power, glory, kingdom. I think those are the words that they used.
Sounds right.
And I'm referencing the King James Version. Yeah, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. So still, you can see in that translation that something akin to Thor is being worshipped. The kingdom, the power, the glory. It has a certain archetypal quality to it, that set of adjectives.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, probably, I suppose that was the most respectable thing they could think of to say. Like they were attempting to be as highly respectable as they could.
Right.
And saying like, all the authority is yours. Maybe authority is better than power. Like,
interesting.
You have all the authority.
Right. And obviously, I do think that God has all the power. I'm just saying it's a funny emphasis.
Right.
Yeah, of course. The unified field is the source of power. That eternal place is where all power comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see that they were trying to praise as highly, like using the highest words that they could, although they don't sound like the best ones to me. But maybe they did when King James did it.
Yeah.
It was King James that did it, right?
No.
I think so. No?
No, King James just had it commissioned supposedly by a team of 46 translators Some rumors say that Sir Francis Bacon had something to do with like Sir Francis Bacon was like the executive translator of the process. But that is a conspiracy theory. But so this is kind of a random tangent, but an interesting clue. Read Psalms 46 in the King James Version. So supposedly the works of Shakespeare and the King James translation of the Bible were orchestrated by Sir Francis Bacon in collaboration with a bunch of Freemasons. And there are clues left in the works of Shakespeare that are like allusions to Freemason rituals and ideas, and clues left in the King James Version that Sir Francis Bacon planted in both. That Shakespeare was a made-up character, and King James was translated by a big team, but then executive produced or executive edited by Sir Francis Bacon. So here's one of these. This is interesting, and this is a conspiracy theory. This is not. If you Google this, you won't find this. Psalms 46. Go to the 46th word from the beginning. It's shake. Go to the 46th word from the end. It's spear. That's kind of funny.
That's weird.
Psalms 46. And supposedly the character, the actual person, William Shakespeare, who according to this conspiracy theory was a made-up character by this group of people who just wanted to publish a body of great literature in order to enlighten the world, literature that was politically and religiously non-sectarian so that it would be appreciated all over the world and would just uplift, like, can we make the world more noble, more beautiful, more articulate, more well-read, more literate by putting out a body of incredible plays that are accessible to anyone of any political or religious orientation? And can we make up a noble, honorable man who wrote the whole thing? And Shakespeare's kids weren't even literate. His parents weren't literate. He couldn't have had the French, Latin, Greek background to write all of the stuff.
Wild.
I find it a viable conspiracy theory, and the Psalms 46 thing is pretty funny. I mean, look it up.
That's very weird.
Look it up for yourself. And supposedly Shakespeare was 46 when they dropped the King James, or he died at 46 or something, one of those.
Okay.
So anyway, the King James, who was a friend of the Freemasons, that's part of what feeds into this conspiracy theory. He commissioned for that translation to be made, and that was the first version of the Bible that was authorized by the Catholics that was in English. And the Catholics were the church. This was pre-Reformation, so it was just that was the church. And a guy named Richard Tyndale had already released an English version of the Bible, but it made some theological distinctions that the Catholics didn't like or want. And so the King James was like, okay, fine. If you guys are going to have an English version, here's the English version we want you to have. Here it is.
That's great.
Yeah.
That type of thing happens like in like now with like product. Like if fans end up making something, then the company will like shut it down and be like, no. You're not just going to make that for free. We'll make it. We'll sell it to you if you want it.
Exactly.
If we have to sell it to you, we will.
Right. Because the Catholics, they were only allowing the Bible to be in Latin. I mean, the Bible was written in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek. And they're like, only in our Latin translation. It's like, come on, that's a little funky.
The hardest one.
Right,
that
the
only
most
they knew.
like academically oriented, challenging, like uppity language.
That way you have to go to them specifically.
Right, exactly. And then when Tyndale dropped his translation, there was words that the Catholics had translated. They had told people that the Bible says you have to get X and Y from a priest. Even though Jesus, the only time he flipped out was like, hey, don't tell people that they have to jump through all these hoops and get their shit from a priest. This is not what it's about.
Yeah.
The Catholics were doing that. And so Tyndale dropped his version, and it said that you have to confess your sins to an elder, to a believer who you felt was more spiritually mature than you, who would listen and, whatever. And so then, of course, when the Catholics dropped the King James, it said priest instead of elder. So they were trying to correct things like that. Like, nah, you do need the organization. You do need the structure here.
Right. Sorry to derail.
No.
That was an interesting sidebar, though.
Yeah, and I'm done. I just wanted to go over the Greatest Commandment, the Golden Rule, and the Lord's Prayer. The next, I want to go over the Beatitudes separately because I also haven't covered that second half of Prayers of the Cosmos. So I'm going to work on memorizing the Beatitudes in Aramaic, learning that translation, and then making connections between that series of teachings and unity consciousness or non-duality as well. So that'll be the next episode or the one after.
Sounds good. Yeah.
And that's all I got for today.
Cool. I think that was great. That was really interesting.
Night school.
Night school.